Everybody's here, and I am glad you're here. I think I'm on. No? I thought I was on last week. I'm pretty sure I checked it, though. Darla was talking to me. Hey, I'm on. I've got you worried, don't I, with the big notebook? I'll explain that in a second. But I am glad that you guys all came today, and I appreciate it. You're gonna have to sit in the front row, Jim. Front row, yeah. I know it's hard. It's hard being a Yankees fan, sitting on the front row. But we're starting a new series today, and it's called "The Ark of the Lost Raiders." I don't know where the name came from, but we're going to be talking over the next couple weeks about one of the most probably, I would not say controversial, but one of the most argued and maybe one of the most maligned stories in the Bible about Noah's Ark. And there's a lot of back and forth. I even last night while I was watching TV, I heard it referred to as Noah and his magical zoo, or Noah and his magical floating zoo, right? And as someone just made a snide comment about Noah's Ark. And usually it falls into a category of either Christians on one side and scientists on the other. And the scientists believe that the world is hundreds of millions of years old, and Christians believe that Noah and this whole flood deal. And so there's this deal. And so we're going to attempt over the next couple weeks to launch out of this story or into this story of the flood, to gather out some of the great questions that we have. And today we're going to be dealing with our problem of evil and in our world and in our culture. This past week, or a couple weeks ago, I guess, is when it happened. Aaron Rodgers, a famous football player, began to come out against the faith that he was raised in and said, how can a loving God destroy his creation? How can he send good people to hell? And so there's this back and forth, and we're going to be addressing some of that problem. How can God destroy his creation? And the quick answer to an Aaron Rodgers is, well, Genesis chapter 6 explains it pretty clearly how a loving God can destroy his creation. But a lot of times it's presented to us by this graphic. We're given an option here of perspective, and this is the kind of the peacemaker kind of brings this along and says, well, it's just a matter of where you're standing. If you grew up in church, you probably believe in Noah and the ark and the flood and all of that. And if you didn't grow up, you probably have a different perspective. And it's okay to see things from your own perspective. It's okay to look at things differently and to hold different beliefs and counter beliefs. And the problem with this picture is it only kind of serves as a help for just a few moments. What really takes place is you begin to ask yourself, well, who painted the graphic on the ground? And obviously there was an author. Somebody had to paint either the 6 or the 9, right? Somebody had to come along with a pencil, and they had to, or a can of spray paint or whatever. Someone came along and they put that image there, and perhaps it fell off a building. Maybe there was a building along the side of the road. It fell off, and the building had a specific name. But here's what we know. There was an author that wrote that graphic. And that author had an intent to convey a message. Either he meant to convey a 6 or a 9. And the only way that you and I can get right is to understand that if we just stop at saying, okay, well, you look at it and you see a 6, and I look at it and I see a 9, and it's just a matter of perspective, and can't we all get along, is that somewhere there's an author, and the author had an intent. And we've got to get back to that author, and we've got to get back to that intent, and we've got to find out the truth, because it really is a 6 or it is a 9, and the only person that can tell us that is the author. And so here's our struggle, and we live in our culture that's all about, hey, listen, everybody gets their own perspective. We can all be right. You're just looking at it from your own view and your own, it depends on whether you grew up here or there or whatever, if you grew up this, that, or the other. And it's not perspective, it's truth. And we can't land at perspective and say, let's stop there. We got to get to truth. My dad is a historian, was a historian. He spent all of his life searching history. And there's you got historians and you got scientists. Scientists get rich. Historians collect knowledge. They collect books. And when my dad passed away a few years ago, I got all of his books and much of his research. And this is my dad's collection of flood myths. There are, in our world, at least 150 different flood myths from all over the globe. I want somebody out there to pick a continent. Asia? Are we going to Asia? Did you say Asia? Only because you were nice to me yesterday at the grocery store. Let's see here. How do I find Asia? You guys got time to hang out for a few minutes? Let's see here. Wow. I thought this would be a lot quicker. Probably not going to do this again in the second service. Maybe I should pick, then it looked like it's fixed. What happens, I took his, he had a little marker in here, and I took it out. And I shouldn't have. All right, here we are. Oh, I'm in Mexico. Now I'm in Oklahoma. I got a long ways to go to get to Asia. There's Africa. Babylon. I'm going the right direction. What's that? Babylon. I was reading the one from from Iran. My son-in-law is Iranian in his descent, and the Zoroastrians. Here's the one from Iran. After Ahura Mazda, you guys know Ahura Mazda, right? The god of the Zoroastrians, and warned Yima that the destruction in the form of winter, frost, and flood subsequent to the melting of the snow are threatening the sinful world. He proceeds to instruct him to build a vara, or a fortress, in which specimens of small and large cattle, human beings, dogs, birds, red flaming fires, plants, and foodstuffs will be deposited in pairs. So just about everywhere. Bangkok would be Asia, wouldn't it? Okay, here's the Asian flood story. An old lady, weary and covered with sores, arrived in a town called Sonanzinzi and sought hospitality, which was denied her at all homes. But at last she came to when she was well and ready to depart, and told her friends to pack up and leave with her. And the place was cursed and would be destroyed by Zambi. The night after they left, heavy rains came and turned the valley into a lake, drowning all the inhabitants of the town. The sticks of the houses can still be seen deep in the lake. Basically, 150 different flood stories. Most of them, I was really intrigued by the Algonquins. That's the Boston area. The Algonquin story included that of a raven. And over and over and over, if you begin to look at all these flood myths, these flood stories, the scientists on one side would say, well, there was no flood, but you look at history, and almost every culture, almost every tribe, almost on every continent, there is some mythical story. We would call it a myth. We would call it, maybe in our, if we were a little more honest to it, we would say there were historical stories passed down from generation to generation about this worldwide flood. And almost everybody in antiquity had a flood story where the God destroyed the earth. And so it's not a matter of perspective, it's a matter of of reality. And what we've got to get to is we've got to figure out who designed this graphic on the ground, whether it's a 6 or a 9. It does matter. And we got to ask the author, where did that come from? Where is it that we find truth? And there's a struggle in mankind to diminish the stories, the ancient stories that were passed down to us, and just say, you know what, we'll just write our new stories. We'll come up with new, a new truth, and you can have your old truth, and you can look at it from that perspective, and that's fine. Or you can, we'll just adopt this new way of looking at things. And here's the problem for us: is when we dismiss God, we are left in a place called not God. And not God is a very terrible place to be. In fact, it's hell. When we dismiss God, we say, you know what, I don't want God in my life, and I don't want to be included in the story of God. I don't want God to, I don't want to live my life according to His story. We get rid of His story. We move on into our story. Then we move on in a place without God, and it's a very dangerous and woeful place. And that's exactly where we find ourselves today in Genesis chapter 6. It's a story of everyday evil. And I'll ask you, if you will, to stand with me in honor of God's Word as we read our passage today. Genesis chapter 6, verse 1. Says, now it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and the daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful. And they took wives to themselves of all whom they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man forever. For he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. And there were giants on the earth in those days, and afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men and bore children to them, those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. So the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing, and bird of the air, for I am sorry that I made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. You may be seated. We find ourselves in a terrible place in the world when we remove ourselves from the place of God. And we see that in this passage, that there is, you know how the story is going to flow. There's going to be this terrible storm. There's going to be this terrible flood that comes in and destroys the earth. And what we see here is the storm beginning to turn. And over the next couple of weeks, we're going to see all that God carries out here. But we see the churning begin here. And I think it's important for us to know, first of all, kind of the climate of Noah's day. What was the climate like? It was one of the major things when you're looking at a hurricane coming. For those of you that are not Floridians, if there's a hurricane coming, it always develops in an area of low pressure. Right? There's an area of low pressure that comes out usually off the coast of Africa, and it begins to move across the Atlantic, finding the warm waters. And because there's low pressure, all of that moisture that's in the ocean begins to evaporate in the heat of the summer, and it moves up into the clouds, and it collects in the air. And really, when you're looking for a storm, you want to find a storm, look for an area of low pressure. And one of the things we see in this passage is that there was very little pressure to do what was right. There was here described in this passage, there was the godly line of Seth. Last week we looked at Cain and Abel, and we saw all the murder there, and we saw Cain killing Abel, and then Seth comes along as Abel's replacement. God banishes Cain away. Cain is off, and the descendants of Cain are what we will refer to as the sons of men. They were the ungodly line. They were the people that had rejected God. And then Seth comes along, and Seth is the godly line. So you see in this passage that there were God's people, and then there were people who had rejected God. They now had come to a place where verse 1 says that men began to multiply on the face of the earth, And in verse 2 it says, and the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were beautiful. And so that the sons of God, the descendants of Seth, begin to marry with the ungodly daughters of men. Some people make this about demons and marriage between a human and a demon, and I don't see that at least in biology, it's not possible. Right? So we can argue about that later. But I believe the first understanding of this is that here you have the godly line of Seth, and they begin to make decisions on who they're going to marry by how they look. They said, you know what? Those women over there are more beautiful than the women we have. And they began to make a decision, and you know what? There was really no pressure to make a right decision, and so we begin to make material decisions. We begin to choose things based upon how they appear. And then notice the second part of verse 2 there says that they took as many as they wanted. They lived in an area of low pressure, right? There was no pressure to do right. The kind of day that we live in today is an area of low pressure. We just do whatever we want. We make choices based upon beauty instead of character. We make choices, I'll just have as many partners that I care to have. And it's all about indulging the flesh. And wherever you see an area of low pressure, you need to know that there is a storm raging. Or at least a storm brewing. That wherever that area of low pressure is, there's going to be a hurricane that comes out of that, and that's exactly what is happening here in Genesis chapter 6. And so we see that the storm clouds begin to raise, and people are making decisions based upon that, and God says, I'm not always going to strive with man. Not always going to be in battle with man. I'm not going to allow that. Look at verse 3. The Lord said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever. For he is flesh, and yet his days will be 120. I'm gonna come in and I'm going to change some things here. I'm going to shorten the life of man. I'm going to let's manage that lifespan, because the longer people lived, the more bad decisions they were making, the more trouble there was in the world, and God comes in and begins to shorten the lifespan of man down to 120 years, and so that storm begins. And we've had some storms. We had 1 year here in Four Corners, we had 3 separate storms crisscross here. We had Charlie. I remember Charlie. What was it? Wilma? And Francis. I always forget Francis. Oh, Jean, that was it. Jean. Yeah. And here they come, and they came and they decided that Four Corners was going to be where they all had their presence in the state of Florida. And we lost 2 Sundays that year. We just kind of kept having to run and hide. And the reality is that where that low pressure system is, the storm clouds begin to build, and storms are pretty predictable. We have, you guys up out in the Midwest, you have these tornadoes, and tornadoes are not super predictable. But hurricanes are. We can see the low pressure. We can see the thunder heads begin to rise, and we can see that. But when we remove ourselves from those areas of pressure, then we make better decisions. But here are the sons of men, and they are beginning now to begin to strive with God. They're beginning to argue with God. They're beginning to fight with God. And God says, you know what? I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to play this game. I'm not going to allow this. We see this culture, this climate of Noah's day being one where everybody's kind of making their own decisions based upon material things, based upon the fleshly things. And God says, you know what? I'm not going to argue with man. God doesn't argue with us. He doesn't strive with us. We might argue with Him. We might shake our fist at heaven. We might scream and yell and say, why God? But God doesn't argue with us. We see them moving now into the eye of the storm. Verse 5. So the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. So those updrafts, one after another, begin to just, we watch these hurricanes and they just start soaking up, right? The more the storm begins to build, the more they just soak up all that moisture, and that moisture just gets in you got that eye of the storm, and in that eye of the storm, man, it's just soaking up the energy. And that's kind of where we see this passage is developing here. And God's just saying, you know what? I'm not always going to argue with man. And God looks down and look at all the emphatic words in this. The wickedness of man was great. Not great as in good, great as in humongous. That it was intense. It was the extreme level of wicked. If there was wickedness in the world, this was a great wickedness. This was a terrible, large, overwhelming wickedness. And it was great in the earth. And that every intent. There was no ever an intent in man's heart that wasn't wicked. Every intent of his heart was only evil continually. It's as if God is dictating this to Noah or Moses, and he's saying to Moses, I want you to write about Noah's day, and I want you to tell them how wicked man was. And God keeps throwing in adjective after adjective after adjective to talk about how bad it was. It was only evil, and it wasn't just only evil, it was only evil all the time. Aaron, do you want to know why a loving God would destroy his creation? 6:5. We don't get very far in the story of man where we find ourselves completely in a place of no pressure to do whatever we want, choosing not to have God influence our life. And when we do that, the only thing that's left is evil. We have a problem with evil in our culture. We have a problem with evil in our hearts. That our problem with evil is that when we choose not to be part of God's story, when we reject God from our storyline, and we begin to chase after the things of this world, and the only thing that's left there, all that the world has to offer is evil. And we choose evil. And so it was the climate of Noah's day that everybody was choosing evil. And it's a lot like we have gotten in our modern sense, and a lot like all of our history, is that whenever we choose not to follow God, we choose the not God, and what's not God is evil. And so you're watching this hurricane just build in its intensity, and the bigger it gets, and the wider it gets, the tighter the eye of that storm is, and the tighter the eye of that storm is, the faster it turns, the more destructive it's going to be. And so we began probably about 4 or 5 days out. We watched the spaghetti models. And I'm not talking about Italian young ladies walking down a runway. I'm talking about the forecast of destruction that's coming. This is going to land somewhere, right? It's that this storm is building. It's getting worse and worse until there is going to come a point when it has and makes an impact. And we're watching this in Noah's day as the man rejects God. They begin to turn after the things of this world. They choose a position not to have God influencing their lives, and they begin to strive with God. They begin to work against God, and God says, you know what, I'm not always going to do that. I'm not always going to put up with man. And yet they keep running from God, and they keep turning away from God. And the more they turn away from God, the more evil their thoughts become, and the more God rejects them. And we see the storm building, and it's going to come ashore. And so we begin to think about, well, what if it comes on this place or that place? What if it hits land here? And what's it going to do? And verse 6 says, and the Lord was sorry that he made man on the earth, and God was grieved in his heart. So here comes the destruction, right? Here we see it building. We know it's moving. It might be moving slow, but it's coming. And I think a lot of times when we think of God and God dealing with sin, we think it's God just gets angry with a big lightning bolt in heaven. He loses his temper, and it's like zap. Sorry. Glad you're back. Missed you last week. Feeling better? Yeah. Zap the Yankees. That's our mindset, right? Man does wrong, God gets angry, and God, zop, nails him. Like a big billy club, right? Or he's got this, caveman club, and he's just waiting to whack you when you do wrong. And verse 6 actually tells us the exact opposite. Look at it again. That when man turns away from God, chooses not God, when man says, you know what, I'd rather have the things of this world than the things of God, God is the storm's brewing, absolutely. And when the destruction comes, look at how it comes. God was sorry. Wait a minute, how can God be sorry? Doesn't God know everything? Didn't God foresee this? Didn't God recognize that this was going to happen? And yet here is the sorrow of God, and God was sorry that he made man on the earth, and then God was grieved in his heart. Here's God in a place of mourning, and the caricature that the world would have us to accept is that God is somehow some irrational, old bearded guy with a lightning bolt or a club ready to just nail people. But here is God, and man is rebelling against God to the point that every thought of his and intent of his heart was only evil continually. Like there was no redeeming good thought. There was no decent thought in man's heart or mind. He never had a nice idea to say, you know what, let me do something good for the world. Let me help old ladies across the street. Let me, pet the dog. No good thoughts at all, and God is sorry, and God is grieved, and God is reluctant to judge. God didn't just say, you know what, let's just nail him, let's just get him, let's just wipe him out. God is grieving over sin. We need a new perspective on God. We need to understand who God is telling us he is in the Bible and not let people tell us who God is. God's grieved about the sin in my life. And every time I break one of his commands, and every time I make a choice based on the indulgence of my flesh and what I want, and rather than what he wants for me, it grieves the heart of God. God wishes it wasn't so. And he gives us this warning, and we have this, with a hurricane, we have what's called the cone of uncertainty. Echo, 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 right? We have this cone. Let me tell you, there's a cone of certainty here. That God has laid it out, that God will judge sin. And those of us who've chosen a life of sin, we've chosen not God. We've chosen the option to say, you know what, I'm just going to live over here in a place of sin. I don't want God. I don't want to have anything to do with God. There's a cone of certainty that God will judge. God is going to judge. Genesis chapter 6, verse 3 says, my spirit shall not always strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120. We get fooled by these hurricanes and these model forecasts. We think they're coming here and they're coming there. But when it comes to the Word of God, you can be certain that God will judge sin. Look at Romans 14. It says, for we shall all stand before the judgment seat of Christ. For it is written, as I live, says the Lord, every knee shall bow to me, and every tongue shall confess to God. And each of us will give account of himself to God. This is the doctrine of individual soul liberty. You can do whatever you want. God has given you freedom to choose to follow him or not. But know this, that every one of us will stand before God. Every one of us will give account of ourselves to God. Every one of us will have a day and a time. And when our time comes, it will make landfall. And either our sin will be judged on Jesus on the cross, or it'll be on us. Scratchy throat this morning, I apologize. So what do we do? You know a storm is coming. We've got to prepare for the storm, don't we? How do you prepare for storm? We know the climate of Noah's day. Look at how to prepare your day. The first instruction, I believe, is we've got to find shelter. Verse 8 says, Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And grace is not some lost child. He understood that there was salvation in God. And although God is going to judge, Noah found grace in the midst of a sinful world. Here's this guy, Noah, who lived an upright life and attempted to seek after God. And even then, he required God's grace for salvation. He was sinful. He just wasn't as sinful as everybody else. And he comes and he finds a place of shelter. Listen, if I could scare you into heaven, I would try to do it today, but I don't think I can. I don't think anybody's that persuasive. To say, listen, there's a storm brewing. Your sin has angered a holy and righteous God. And because you have chosen sin, you need a Savior. You need to find shelter. Noah found grace. Grace is that shelter. And if you're here today and you've never accepted God's grace, you've never accepted that a holy and righteous God is angry at your sin, but yet has provided salvation through Jesus Christ, then I pray that today you will find that grace as your shelter for your salvation. I think the second response we do is once we've found grace, we start building an altar, an ark. Genesis 6:14. I'm sorry, I waited too long to go for that water. Now that's there. You're just going to have to deal with it. Genesis 6:14. God tells Noah, make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and outside with pitch. So first step, find grace. Noah found grace, verse 6. Now, Noah, build an ark. The ark is not Noah working for his salvation. The ark is the result of Noah's salvation. Noah's salvation was grace. He obeyed the grace that was extended to him, and therefore he was to build an ark. I really honestly believe that Noah's building of the ark was the demonstration of the faith that he had, and our obedience and our accepting of Jesus Christ as our Savior is just a demonstration of the faith that we have. So God extends grace to us, and by faith we accept that Jesus Christ died on the cross for us. And so therefore our salvation, although it may appear that Noah built the ark and therefore he was saved by good works and by working hard to earn his salvation, no, it was just that was just the demonstration of his faith. And we're saved by grace through faith, that not of ourselves, it's a gift of God, not of works, lest anyone would boast. And so here is the full representation. One of the greatest responsibilities for those of us who accepted salvation by grace through faith is to start building some arks. Amy and I had a chance to go and visit the ark replica a couple years ago. Any of y'all been there? Good third, maybe a fourth of us have been there. I would encourage you. There's nothing else out there. It's Kentucky. So go and then go to Cincinnati. It's probably something in Cincinnati. And we toured and we walked around, and there was definitely enough room on the ark for the animals. But what I found fascinating is there wasn't just room for 8 adults on the ark. There was more than enough room for Noah and his family and a bunch of others. And that one of the things that we do once we've accepted Jesus Christ as our Savior is we begin to invite others to come, and we begin to fill that ark. Right? So we if you will, we gather together and we work together to build refuges for other people. And so here the church is one of those places, right? So we get together as believers in this community, we build the church, and then our job is to fill the church. And you guys have done a good job today. But the reality is that we accept by grace. we do good works, we build that ark, and then we invite people into that ark. And 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 5 says that God did not spare the ancient world, but he saved Noah, one of 8 people. And then he describes Noah as a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood on the world of the ungodly. So imagine you're in a large ship, and because of the storm that's going on, the hurricane that you're in, you get tossed overboard. And so here you are, and you are in the cold, icy ocean, and somebody reaches down and they grab you by the hand and they pull you on board that ship. And you are now what we would refer to as saved. You've been rescued. What do? Well, you do what you'd always do on a cruise ship, right? You head on up to the Lido deck. You get you one of those umbrella drinks, sit by the pool? Absolutely not. What do? You begin to pull other people out, right? You begin to look off in the distance and say, the man overboard over there, let's go over there and let's get him, and let's reach out and let's pull them up. You're not that concerned about yourself, and you're not concerned about all the things of this world and how nice everything is and the view at the pool and all those things. What do? We accept that God is angry at sin all the time, according to the Psalms. God is angry at sin. God is that storm is coming ashore. God will judge sin according to Scriptures. And those of us who've received salvation from judgment by grace need to build arks and pull people in. We need to reach overboard, and we need to find people in our lives that are going through storms, and we need to fill that ark. And so the Bible describes here in 2 Peter that Noah was a preacher of righteousness. Noah wasn't satisfied with his own salvation. He wasn't a carpenter of righteousness. He wasn't a builder of righteousness. He was a preacher of righteousness. So what's he doing? He's nailing a few boards on the ark, and then he's telling the crowd. He stops and he preaches a while. You want to know why it took 120 years to build the ark? Because Noah was a preacher. And it's Groundhog Day, so I'm going to preach this sermon twice. Here's the thing. If we know that sin is a departure from God and God's directive and God's plan, and yet it's to the point here in Genesis chapter 6, all of mankind's heart, both the people of the world and the people of God are making decisions based upon the things of this world. That God comes and says, God, I'm not always going to strive with man. I'm going to destroy this. I cannot let this carry on this way because we have reached the end of man's morality. Every thought of his heart was only evil continually. There was no morality left in man. And so God says, I'm going to destroy the earth. And yet he chooses out Noah and he saves Noah. And he pulls Noah out of that crowd and says, you know what, I'm going to extend grace to him. Noah responds to the grace of God by building the ark. And he builds an ark not just big enough to save his own rear end, but to save everybody's rear end. So there he is, and he's working to build the ark, and he's working to fill the ark. He's inviting everybody to come and to find the grace that he had. One of the saddest moments in this whole story is when God shuts the door. Noah didn't shut the door, God shut the door. Now there's an end to the grace of God. God is long-suffering, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. But even his long-suffering will finally come to an end, and it did in Noah's day, and it will in our day. And I don't want to be the guy saying the end is near. I'm not walking around with a sandwich board, just shouting at the crowd. But that's who Noah was. And he begins to express the need for people to come to salvation. And if you're here today and you've never accepted the grace of God, well, that's where you're at. You need to accept the grace of God because by His grace, you have had your time extended. And He hasn't saw fit to judge you yet. But that storm, that area of low pressure and that lifestyle that you've been living, those things that you've been doing have all worked against you. to bring up the rage of God's storm in your life. And there's a cone of certainty, and it's pointed right at your destruction. And before it comes ashore, you have this period of grace where you can find a shelter. And for those of us who found shelter, we've got to start building some arks. That's why we plant churches. That's why we saw fit as a church to go 20 minutes down the road and plant another church last year. Because that church is having services today with its own crowd. And they are an ark, and they are pulling people in, and they're bringing people to the grace of God and proclaiming the grace of God. And that every one of us who've been pulled out of the death that was due us should not just take up our umbrella drinks and just relax and sit still and think everything's nice and relaxed. We need to be looking out for others and looking for people whose storms are going on in their life. So here's our homework today. Begin today. Stop chasing the wind. Ecclesiastes talks about how we chase the wind, right? You ever try to grasp the wind? Can't be done. You can chase after a lot of things in this world. The richest, most successful man in the Bible said, you know what? That's chasing the wind. So we stop chasing the wind. We stopped trying to fight against. Noah wasn't fighting against a sinful culture, right? He didn't become a policeman. He didn't try to use politics to get everybody to stop only thinking evil thoughts continually. I think there's a lot of times in our world and in our culture where Christians make ourselves something that we're not supposed to be. We stop chasing after things that aren't going to make a difference. We got to be really careful that we don't spend all of our time chasing after the things of this world and using the world's methods to try to create change and make a difference. And there's a danger. What are we to do? We're to build the ark. We let our actions back up our words, and that's what Noah did. He's like, the end is coming. God is going to judge us for all the sinfulness that we've been living. And for 120 years, here he is, and his actions demonstrate what he really believed. And I wonder if the people in our life, the things that we're spending our time on, if our actions would demonstrate what our beliefs are, or if our actions look a lot like their actions. See, when they look at us, they should see us as ark builders, right? That we become a refuge for the hurting. That we're the safe place. We're not here to argue whether it was a 6 or whether it was a 9. We're here to tell them that there was an author. And that author had a purpose. And I know that you're in a storm right now. And I know that you're in a struggle right now. But you have a creator, and that creator made you. And there's been a time in your life when you chose to not follow God. But God has allowed that storm into your life to bring you to a point where you would seek refuge. And there is refuge in the Creator, and in the ark, and in the cross. And if you will accept by faith the grace that was extended to you, then you too can have the forgiveness of sins and the salvation that Noah experienced. We who could be arguing with everybody else over little things that don't matter and won't matter 100 years from now can become ark builders. And we can become people of refuge. And that's what my prayer is for our church this week. Will you bow your heads?